Welcome back to the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. On our episode today, we are joined by Ruthie Eisenberg. She is an LMFT, LPCC, PMHC, and CYT. She is a dedicated California licensed psychotherapist with over a decade of experience. And specializing in maternal and perinatal mental health, she provides therapy, postpartum CBT and DBT skills coaching, and support groups through her private practice, mental fitness therapy. And what she's sharing with us today is a bit about her experience transitioning into motherhood and how she ended up working in perinatal mental health. But also, she's talking about some signs and symptoms, or what she calls orange flags, to watch out in new moms that could be easily missed. She also talks about how to incorporate yoga into therapy and how she works with people in yoga for therapy purposes, and how she is wanting to bring yoga to moms everywhere to use on and off the mat to help manage daily stress and optimize parenting on a daily basis. Despite being a therapist, Ruthie was caught off guard by the challenges of motherhood and the juggle of parenting. And that inspired her to work towards her certification from Postpartum Support International, as well as working at El Camino Hospital's Moms Program, creating groups and providing care for struggling perinatal moms and their families. In her practice and in her work, she draws from a variety of therapy modalities, including experiential, IFS, brain spotting, EFT tapping, expressive arts, mindfulness, yoga, CBT, and DBT. Ruthie's experience living in Russia, Israel, and the USA has instilled in her a deep respect for cultural uniqueness, and she incorporates cultural strengths, creativity, and spirituality into her therapy work. So, with that, let's meet Ruthie.
Welcome, Ruthie. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me on, Kat.
I am excited because I know a little bit about what you're going to share, not only some of your own story, but really useful and practical tools for people who are listening, which just think is so very important. So before we get to that, please do start wherever you'd like with your story.
Hey, so you know how some people just can't wait to be a mom and have kids. So that was not me.
I so appreciate you saying that. Yeah.
For me, I kind of actually was scared of having kids, and I kind of dreaded the idea of motherhood. To me, I would see all these new parents and moms in my community, and they would just be so stressed out and be organizing their life around the kids' nap times. And for me, motherhood kind of had this idea in my head that motherhood would be a complete loss of freedom. I would be signing my life away and just be miserable the whole time. At the same time, there was another part of me that really did want kids and felt like I would be missing something in life if I didn't become a mom. Plus, there was also tremendous pressure from my family and community to be a parent. So when I was expecting my daughter, I was kind of grappling with these two sides, like the dread and the fear of motherhood, but also a sense of obligation and curiosity about motherhood. And all of these mixed feelings were so much that I just kind of avoided them and avoided. We took all the parenting books that people gave us and we just kind of shoved them in the back of the closet and didn't look at them. And then when we arrived from the hospital with the baby and our daughter was crying and we couldn't calm her down, and we just kind of started panicking. And my husband and I were like, oh my God, where's those books in the back of the closet? Let's dig them out and start flipping frantically to find the answers, what we should do. So I was completely unprepared for motherhood. But after those initial few weeks with my daughter, I was pleasantly surprised because motherhood wasn't as terrible as the picture I painted in my head beforehand. And I attribute that to having really good family support at the time. So that with my daughter, things went pretty much okay. However, a few years later, with my son, it was a different story.
Mm.
I experienced some birth trauma. He arrived suddenly and 5 weeks early, and he
Oh.
was in the NICU. And I um, I also I was working in a pretty stressful job at the time, so I went to the hospital with my computer thinking that I would be going to the office in a few hours after some routine monitoring. And
Uh-huh.
when I arrived to the hospital, I was told that, oh, actually, you can't leave right now. You have to have the baby. And so
Yeah. Shocking.
once again, it was completely unprepared, but
Yeah,
in
yeah.
a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And things I felt pretty I felt pretty overwhelmed, and I felt overwhelmed in several ways, but mostly I felt a lot of mom guilt about, maybe my mind started automatically going to like, well, maybe I did something wrong that created these medical complications that made the baby arrive early. And I was just kind of like ruminating on what could be the reasons. Maybe
Mm,
it was because I was too stressed at my job. Maybe it
mm,
was,
mm,
maybe I wasn't like, you know, I don't know, maybe I wasn't like eating enough folic acid, whatever.
mm-hmm.
So I just like was inventing these reasons, and felt a lot of guilt, and also felt a lot of guilt about leaving my job so abruptly to go on maternity leave.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so so I made so I was feeling I was pretty stressed, and I was I was anxious a lot of the time. I was irritable a lot of the time. Every time I would look at my son, who was like such a cute, precious baby, it would just be a reminder of all the ways that I'd failed.
Oh,
And and it was really sad, but
yeah.
I wasn't really like sharing these feelings or talking about them. Um,
Yeah.
and and then I made one of the worst decisions in my life, which was to go back to work at 6 weeks postpartum, like the
Mm,
shortest amount of time, which was
mm.
a totally guilt-driven decision because I felt so bad about like leaving things with loose ends not wrapped up.
Oh
And
gosh.
um, yeah, and that just kind of created this perfect, internal storm of
Mm-hmm.
like feeling super stressed, guilty, lots of shame going on.
Mm,
Um, Lots of irritability when I would come home. It was a real struggle, and that year also we had a lot of like external situational stressors. My son had to have this emergency surgery. We had to
oh gosh.
move shortly afterward. Like my grandpa died. I
Oh no.
I lost my
Just like
job. Like there
piling
was
on.
yeah, things just kind of like piled up that year. And um and this whole time I was also working as a therapist, and
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of like i was I was working with others, but I was keeping it together, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And um and really like almost like turning a blind eye to all these symptoms that I was having, and just being too busy, moving too quickly to
Mm-hmm.
really stop and assess what was going on with
Mm-hmm.
me. And
Mm-hmm.
that actually, like, I was okay, I was functioning from the outside, everything looked fine, but I really wasn't feeling okay.
Right.
And uh, and so what and so what really helped me to kind of turn a corner um, was losing my stressful job, and it allowed me to spend some quality time with my son, and to really build that attachment,
Mm,
and to slow down.
right.
And and afterwards, I just by sheer luck and happenstance, I felt so lucky. I ended up in this perfect job for me at the Moms Program at El Camino Hospital,
Nice.
which is a
That's a
just
great
an
program.
amazing program. Have you
Mm-hmm.
heard of it?
Yep.
Yeah. So they do amazing, amazing work there, and it just helps so many lives be better.
Right.
And And that was really like the perfect environment for me also because um, it helped me to go down this. I felt like I found my home base
Oh,
and
nice.
with the perinatal work, and it helped me to kind of like in parallel process learn about what was going on with me and what are all the things that I missed
Mm-hmm.
with myself, and and also learn like the art of pairing of doing therapy for perinatal population.
Mm-hmm.
So it really felt like like the perfect environment for me to develop this specialty.
At what point, like how old was your son when you got to that program?
When I got to that program, he was almost a year.
Mm-hmm.
And by that time by the time I started there, I was already like I was already, kind of like turned the corner because I had this break from my stressful job and I had
Yeah.
this time to slow down and really focus on self-care. So I was already feeling a lot better.
That's great.
Um, but the program really helped to kind of deepen some of the healing, and I think a
Yeah.
lot of unconscious healing happened just through like the parallel process and just
Mm-hmm.
being in that environment. I kind of healed by osmosis.
Oh, for sure. Was that like your first deeper introduction into perinatal mental health?
Not into therapy, but into perinatal mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Right. So you're um, learning more and more about how parents are affected during this period of time, and also realizing that you were affected in some similar
Yeah.
ways. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I was totally affected, and I and and I was one of these people that had so many little subtle signs that were so easy to miss
Mm.
to the to the untrained or unnuanced eye. They were just so easy to miss, and I missed all of them myself too because I just didn't know what to look for.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's such a disservice, I think, to parents.
Hmm.
I was also, I remember when I was in grad school, there was like a whole separate program that was just called behavioral health, and it
Hmm.
dealt with medical stuff.
Hmm.
And afterwards, I realized how strange is it that we separate out things like postpartum depression and anxiety and all that into this medical category as if it's not
Hmm.
mental health. And I think for folks like who went to grad school and became therapists and all that, most of us didn't get any of this unless we were in a behavioral health track. And still then it wasn't
Hmm.
enough.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a
Yeah.
major, major gap. Like,
Yeah.
how many people do you know, therapists do you know, who suffered without knowing what was going on?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes we get so like pigeonholed into like these little tiny specialties that
Hmm.
we miss the bigger picture, and we
Hmm.
can, totally miss a forest for one tree.
Totally. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So then, with like being in that program at El Camino Hospital and learning about
Mhm.
things, I know you said you were already on your path to healing and feeling better, but
Yeah.
this like deeper
Mhm.
understanding was additionally healing for you.
Yes, it was actually a combination of like the of working in that program and learning kind of from the professional angle.
Hmm.
Um, but then I also had other healing that helped me as well. This was when I also went to a somatic therapist who was this very just brilliant, amazing experiential therapist who helped me a lot. Um, I also started a yoga practice, and um, I was doing yoga before also, but here I started to get like really serious about yoga
Hmm.
at this time. And yoga is actually like that was my medicine. That was like the main medicine for me was really yoga. Um, and we can talk a little bit more about that maybe later.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then like the fourth thing that helped to really just open my heart and do some of that deeper work was I did some psychedelic assisted therapy, and I
Hmm.
hope it's okay to talk about that on the
Please do.
podcast.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So the psychedelic assisted therapy, which I did, in very, controlled, supervised, responsible kind of setting,
Yes.
under therapeutic supervision, that was really, really, that just felt like several years of therapy, like accelerated into a shorter amount of time. And it did so much of this deeper healing on like a cellular level that
Hmm.
I could also be consciously aware of. And really just opened my heart and made me see the world with different eyes. Um, and that healing is generative, so the effects of that, they continue kind of working on the system, just moving forward into the
Hmm.
future for indefinitely. So it's a generative kind of healing. It never really ends.
Hmm.
It kind of continues long after the actual
Hmm.
treatment. But that was really, really also powerful healing for me.
How many sessions did you have?
I had, um, I would say, like, in terms of, I had them in a few different settings. So, um, I had less than 10.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like I, I could think maybe like six or seven, something like that.
Right. I know people who are listening are going to have a ton of questions and really want to
Okay.
hear about that.
Okay.
But I also know
Sure.
it was only part of your healing journey.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we can touch on that a little bit, but also
Sure.
for sure the yoga practice. Um,
Sure. Yeah. I'm happy to talk about this part of my healing as well. So if you have questions about it, I'm totally open to sharing stuff.
yeah, yeah, I do. Okay, I'm gonna put a pin in the psychedelic assisted therapy for now. I'll come back to that in a moment. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen, what you've experienced, of how the signs and symptoms are missed? What a new mom, new parent might be experiencing that they wouldn't necessarily recognize as, oh, maybe I should check this out.
Yeah, totally. And this happens so often. There's so many like little orange and yellow flags before they become glaring red flags that are so easy to miss.
Hmm.
And it's not just one thing, but they all kind of like pile up cumulatively and then
Hmm.
become, and that's when we know, okay, like there's a big problem here.
Hmm.
So I like to divide them up into categories of physical signs, cognitive or thought signs, emotional signs or feelings, and behavioral signs. So for the physical signs, uh, new mom or new parent might be experiencing extreme restlessness, or just like constant like physical irritability,
Hmm.
maybe fatigue that's just feeling tired all the time, like lack of appetite, having low energy, things like that. Maybe just looking kind of worn down, or having like, like posture that's like really kind of like, like looking down a lot, like trouble with eye contact, kind of more shut down posture.
Hmm.
So those would be some of the physical signs. Then the signs in the thoughts, cognitive signs could be, just like ruminating a lot, or, getting into these like negative, um, self-shaming spirals, maybe beating herself up for making little mistakes, or worrying like so much about like the baby's nap, and, things like that, catastrophizing, so kind of making bigger, um, kind of making these big catastrophes out of small things, like
Hmm.
seeing like, okay, like the baby has like maybe a tiny rash or something like that, and this is like, means like it's a huge catastrophe.
Hmm.
The baby is like, you know incurably sick or something like that. And then
Hmm.
also problems with cognition, so problems with decision making, organizing, planning, short-term memory, forgetting stuff, problem solving difficulties. So all of those will add up to the cognitive signs. Then we want to look at the feelings. So feeling anxious a lot of the times or scared of things. So this might prevent her from going out or from taking the baby outside on her own. Maybe feeling overwhelmed, feeling guilty. And this is all going to be reflected in how the mom is interacting with the people around her.
Mm-hmm.
So she may be saying, I'm so tired, but I can't take a nap because I need to keep watching the baby, and I don't want to ask my husband because he's busy working on the computer or something.
Mm-hmm.
So these are little signs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then just feeling kind of, maybe she's feeling lonely. And another extreme, feeling a ton of energy and feeling like euphoric and just more energy than she usually has. That would also be a flag.
Yeah.
In terms of behavioral, we want to definitely look at sleep changes. So if she's not sleeping, if her sleep is very broken, and if she's unable to sleep when the baby is sleeping, I would actually say that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah, not an orange flag anymore. But orange flag could be like maybe worrying or checking like, a few more times than a few more times than one on the baby before going to sleep, things like that. Changes in her eating, isolating, neglecting her self-care. So things like, like not showering for a couple of days in a row, staying in pajamas for a couple of days in a row. Things like that, kind of starting to lose herself in motherhood. Would be some of the behavioral signs. Maybe she's neglecting tasks that she's normally does that are easy for her to do. And then also doing maybe some risky or uncharacteristically impulsive behaviors. So one example could be like uh, um, a mom who was so anxious that the baby had like a little rash, that she panicked and rushed the baby to the emergency room and was so panicked in the car that she went through a red light with the baby. So I would say that's actually more than an orange flag. That would be a red flag already. But just maybe like a little bit more impulsive or anything that's uncharacteristic than usual. Also things like trouble asking for help or trouble accepting help that's offered because of feelings of guilt or shame. Those would be little yellow and orange flags. It all piles up.
Yeah, for sure. It does pile up. So right, it could be any constellation of those.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I think it's easier to recognize if it's not something you normally do, but if it is something that you normally do, but it's just like a little bit on steroids, it is harder to tell. Like
definitely.
with your last example, like people who typically don't ask for help, they almost like double down sometimes. I'm
Right.
definitely not asking for help. I can definitely do this on my own. And oh my gosh, it's so exhausting.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And that is just such a great rundown of things for people to look at and try and like reflect on even right now as they're listening, or if that's a difference in their pattern that they've noticed since having a baby, even if it's been years.
Yeah.
For sure, as you know,
Yeah.
people
Right.
suffer for years without knowing that
Oh yeah.
they're suffering.
Right. The stuff doesn't just go away on its own many times.
Right.
It just persists.
Especially if there's like, um, if you've been feeling like reflecting on it, knowing that you haven't been feeling well for a little bit or been suffering for a bit, and then another child comes along and there hasn't been enough healing space or time, and things start compiling, which certainly happens.
I see it happening all the time when there's just life also gets so busy
Yeah.
and get so stuck in like doing mode that there's no time to really reflect on like, am I actually lost in motherhood?
Mm,
And many times the answer is yes, but we have to stop to ask that question. Sometimes
yep.
we don't stop to ask that question.
No, I hardly ever. And it's such a powerful question to ask.
Yeah.
Um, because for so many reasons it's powerful. To your point, there's often not time taken to really reflect.
Yeah.
And also, sometimes people think this is just how it's supposed to be
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
that they're just
Right.
supposed to suck it up. Ugh,
Yeah.
oh, I hate that.
Yeah, so true. I hear this all the time. I hear this all the time. Like, aren't moms supposed to be suffering all day long? They're like, like, no,
No,
they're not.
no.
Or,
Yeah, they don't have to.
you don't have to.
Hmm.
Absolutely. And healing is absolutely possible. But I hear this a lot. Some of these kind of core beliefs or myths about motherhood. It could
Mm,
go either way, really. It could go like, motherhood is just miserable and dreadful, and I'm supposed to be suffering all day through it until they turn 18. Um, or it could go the other way of like, I thought motherhood was going to be fantastic and so much fun with the baby. And why am I not happy? What's happening? What's wrong with me?
yeah.
Um, why am I having all these intrusive thoughts? So that could be the other direction it goes in.
Sure. Yeah, so you were alluding to before some of the ways that you sought healing, but also some of the ways that you have helped people through their healing. What are what are some of those ways?
Some of the ways. So I like to think of healing as consisting of like there's some pillars of recovery, and also not just recovery but maintaining well-being. So I conceptualize them in not seven, six S's. So the six S's of recovery are, first of all, we want to stabilize the sleep.
Mm,
Um, without without enough sleep, we're not going to be able to, our brain is not going to work well,
nope.
um,
Yeah.
and neither will our body.
Hmm.
Um, and then the second one is sunshine. So we want to have some exposure to light and go outside, or at least have windows open and be exposed to sunshine, because we know that makes a difference in how we feel. The third pillar is social support. So this is where a new mom, it can really make all the difference for a new mom, whether she's held and feels like she has support from her family and community, or therapist, or at least some kind of support. So she's not doing everything all alone.
Right.
I think this actually makes a very, very big difference. Moms who are isolated versus moms who have that village behind them,
Hmm.
makes a huge, huge difference. And that village can be built. If we don't have it naturally, a pre-existing village, we can work hard to build that village also. So I want to give hope to moms who are feeling isolated, that there are avenues to build that village for you.
Hmm.
Um, and then the fourth pillar is self-care. Self-care can mean different things to different people. Um, but ultimately, self-care is whatever enhances your mental health and wellness. So like scrolling on a phone for 3 hours is not necessarily self-care.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
not it.
yeah, that's not it. Self-care doesn't always have to even be fun or enjoyable. Self-care
Sure.
could be organizing your closet to make it organized.
Hmm.
That's organizational self-care, and then you feel better.
Hmm.
Self-care could be, getting on a mat and doing some exercise, even though you're sweating and you might not be having that much fun in the beginning. It might be
Yeah.
challenging. So all of that stuff. So self-care can also even be as simple as drinking water, or stopping for a minute to just breathe and do like a forward fold. That's
Hmm.
also self care that doesn't take much time or money or resources at all. And
Which is
that,
so important because it can feel like, oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time to do anything, but it could be a minute.
exactly. It could be a minute. It could be like even like less than a minute. Like we're
Hmm.
breathing all the time anyways.
Hmm.
Self-care could just be like, I'm gonna square off my posture and be really symmetrical. And I'm going to label that as my self-care, because by labeling it, it makes me feel competent, it makes me feel confident, it makes me feel in charge, it makes me feel empowered. So part of the self-care, it's not even so much what we're doing, it's more like what story are we telling ourselves about ourselves
Oh,
while we're doing self-care.
that's a whole thing. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. I'm so glad you're highlighting that. The
yeah,
story is a big deal.
yeah, exactly,
Hmm. Hmm.
exactly. So self-care, that's a big category right there. And then the fifth one, which can go along with self-care, is using skills. That's the fifth pillar of recovery. And skills can be formal skills like cognitive behavioral skills or DBT skills, yoga based skills. But really, it's whatever skills work for you. If you find like 5 skills that work consistently, then they're going to keep working for you. And it's also going to feel empowering if we can. Some of the skills could already be just keep doing the behavior that you're already doing. You can be drinking water and just drinking water, or you could be drinking water and saying, "Oh, I'm using a self-care skill right now. I'm hydrating." Um, we could be saying to ourselves like, "Oh, it's okay. I'm having a really rough day right now. It's okay. I'm going to get through this." We could have that self-talk. We can also elevate that self-talk by labeling it as a skill of positive self-talk. I'm also using skill now. So again, it's a kind of like how we relate to what we're already doing.
Yeah,
Uh,
but it is powerful because it's in some ways it's the difference between not mindless, but
yeah,
choosing to be mindful about
yeah,
how we're moving through the day. But right, making choices intentionally,
yes.
having intention throughout our day actually makes a difference.
Yes, it totally makes a huge difference. And how empowering that is. And it can also teach us that if we're really lacking a skill, like if we're lacking a skill to calm down our baby, it's a skill, which is something that can be learned. It doesn't have to just be intuitive. And
Yes.
that's also empowering to know. And then the sixth pillar of recovery is spirituality. So I look at spirituality very broadly. It's whatever makes you feel connected to yourself and the larger universe, the larger world around you. So spirituality could look like, I'm taking care of this baby, and it's so challenging to take care of this baby. And why am I even doing this? Is there a larger purpose to
Mm,
me doing this? What meaning am I getting from this? What meaning am I contributing from this? So that's spiritual. Spirituality could be connecting with nature. It could be, practicing gratitude. It could be practicing, the self reflection and intentionality. All of that is spiritual. So I look at it very broadly, but that's another very huge pillar of recovery, and really just kind of trusting that, that you have the skills you have the ability to manage life, and that things will eventually fall into place. Things will be okay.
hmm. Right, so that may or may not include any religious beliefs.
Exactly. It's
Hmm.
it's kind of like it's a broader spirituality. So
Hmm.
it can be connected to a religious belief system, but
Hmm.
it's kind of beyond that. It doesn't have to be.
Hmm. Hmm. That's great. And
That's a very spiritual atheist in my life.
I'm sorry, I broke up a little bit. Can you say that again?
Yeah, yeah. I know some very spiritual people who are total atheists. So
Oh, sure.
it's
Right.
spirituality and religion. It can overlap, but it doesn't.
Doesn't have to. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Right. So, I mean, that is a whole other set of practical tools, and you've gone over some signs that might be missed, also ways in which you can impact your own healing and recovery. And very specifically for you, I know that yoga is a big part of what you do and how you support people. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think yoga has such a huge place in healing and recovery. Um, yoga is yoga is medicine, and um, it doesn't mean it has to be the only medicine. So if somebody is also taking other medicine, that yoga doesn't have to be a replacement for that. But yoga
Right.
is a medicine in its own right. So I just want to
Mhm.
clarify
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
What does yoga really mean? People have a lot of misconceptions about yoga being doing downward dogs on a mat. But yoga is so much bigger and broader than that. Yoga really means union between the body, union between the mind, and really union between all parts of the self. So, when the parts of the self are in misalignment, then we get symptomatic. We have internal battles and wars, and life becomes difficult. When parts of ourself are in alignment, then life is just becomes easier.
Mhm.
Um, so so yoga, it's not about twisting into pretzels or doing, like scorpion handstands. That's acrobatics. Yoga is really about connecting to yourself and connecting to your body and mind. It's not even about the body, it's about using the body to connect to the mind.
Mm.
So we do that through movement, through breathing, through concentration and gaze. Those are like the epicenters of yoga. And what really matters is what do you learn about yourself in the process. So much of life can be reflected when we're doing yoga on the mat.
Mhm.
So let's say if we're trying to do like, like camel pose or something, which is it's a challenging pose. Um, it's a deep back bend. And maybe we can't like reach our heels with our hands. So how do we really relate to ourselves in that situation? What do we tell ourselves? How do we
Mhm.
handle the
Mhm.
frustration?
Mhm.
How do we treat ourselves with compassion?
Right.
Do we keep pushing ourselves or do we stop? How do we listen to our body? So all of these questions, they come up with yoga. Yoga opens up feelings and it opens up so many emotions that can be worked through during the yoga process. Sometimes in my yoga classes, especially in like the slower yoga classes like yin, you'll just see people will like automatically start crying and they don't even know why they're crying, but something in the body gets activated,
Mhm.
and and some kind of emotions they get released, and the body kind of does its own healing and repair work. The person might not even know what emotion it is, or why it's happening, or what trauma it might be connected to, but something gets resolved, and then they feel better. um,
What I think is really important about this point in
yeah,
particular is that like healing doesn't have to be fully conscious, meaning it
yeah,
doesn't have to be something you can think about and know. It can
yeah,
just be something you experience. And I think
absolutely.
in some ways, I think that's where like Western cultural approaches
Hmm.
really miss the mark, is that you don't
Hmm.
have to have a full awareness in order to get better and to heal. Um,
Yeah,
it's just not the because it's like not tangible in the way that people want to like know for sure that this is a thing and it's connected to that thing.
hmm,
It can feel a little harder to understand.
hmm,
But what
yeah,
you're describing right now, I think, really takes the pressure off of people. That
yes.
you don't have to like understand it on some fundamental level. You can just experience
Right.
it.
Yeah, you're right on about that. And I think we have this and um we have this model of treatment in the West of like you sit in a room with a therapist and you talk about your problems and that's going to make you feel better. but
And we're
but you're right.
therapists. We
And we
also
are
believe
therapists.
that.
Yes, this is what we do, right?
Right,
Which
right.
is um,
It still does
but
help, but it's not
does
everything.
help. It does help, but my point here is that um, the healing really happens on an unconscious body somatic level.
Mm.
So yes, we can talk about stuff, but even in therapy, when we're talking about things on a just and we're staying at the cognitive level, we're talking about a problem, but not really experiencing um, the emotions associated with it, or experiencing how it affects us, how it percolates in our body. Then we might be missing the mark a little bit, because the real healing, the deeper healing, it happens on a nonverbal level. So um, the beauty of therapy is that we can bridge the nonverbal with the verbal,
Yeah.
and give the nonverbal some meaning and some understanding. That's really beautiful. But but like you said, the actual healing and the release of trauma can happen on a physical cellular level, and we might not have any idea what it's about or insight into it, and that's okay
Sure.
too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I personally think that the more rounded your healing can be, the better overall for you long term.
Yeah.
Um, and certainly, as therapists, we know that like having the insight and making the connections and understanding the
Mhm.
patterns, like there is absolutely a place for that. But for a
Absolutely.
lot of people who experience, this the feeling of like, well, I've talked about this thing for years, and you know, there's
Mhm.
no, it doesn't feel like there's any movement. Um,
Mhm.
there are
Right.
other avenues.
Yes, absolutely. Which is why taking this kind of integrative, holistic approach is such a powerful way to go. We can approach healing
Yeah.
from physical perspective. We can approach it also, like bridge it to the cognitive analytical brain and give it meaning. We can approach it from, from other perspectives as well.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I
Thanks for
think
going
there's
on that
there's
bird
room for
walk with me.
everything.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. For sure. So, yeah, thanks for going with me on that little bird walk, and please do continue.
Okay. Yeah. There's different parts of yoga also that can be helpful in their own ways. There's yoga on the mat, there's yoga off the mat, there's yoga philosophy, which can be incredibly helpful as a complement to like CBT. Um, One thing that I want to emphasize from, from this repository of yoga knowledge that we have is the practice of yoga nidra. And I think this practice is especially relevant to new moms who may be struggling with sleep and sleep deprivation. Um, Yoga Nidra is a very powerful practice where you're basically just laying down on flat on your back, and you're listening to a guided audio, and your only job is to try to stay awake, um,
Mhm.
and and that's it, and you just listen. So meditation is hard for a lot of people. A
Yep.
lot of people struggle with meditation, and
Hmm.
beat themselves up for not being able to focus.
That is true.
Yoga
Yep.
Nidra is a really good alternative to that, because in Yoga Nidra, you actually don't need to focus. Um,
Hmm.
all you need to do is try to stay awake, and that's it. And if you fall asleep, then worst case scenario, you get a really good nap, which
Right.
if you fall asleep, it means you're tired and you probably need it.
Right.
However, if you stay awake during Yoga Nidra, then what you're doing is you're facilitating conscious sleep. And conscious sleep actually yields immense benefits. It gives you the restoration. So 30 to 60 minutes of conscious sleep during Yoga Nidra gives you the restoration equivalent to 2 to 4 hours of regular sleep.
Hmm.
Um, Now, that's not to say it's not a replacement for sleep. So, don't think that you can just get by without sleep and just coast along on Yoga
Yeah.
Nidra.
Right.
Need to sleep. However, if you're already sleep deprived, Yoga Nidra um, can be a really good practice. It also helps to balance the hormones. It helps at postpartum. This is important. It helps to balance the metabolism. It can help with cognition. It can help with mental clarity, creativity. It can help with building self-compassion and really working. It goes very deep into the unconscious, activating the deeper, like the theta and delta waves, which are which are activated during deeper sleep states. So a lot of stuff can get resolved. A lot of internal conflicts and unresolved emotions can get resolved through the yoga nidra practice, kind of on a semi-conscious level. Um, and and it's very cool because while doing yoga nidra, your body and mind are so relaxed and safe that these things, which could be overwhelming to talk about in therapy, can be resolved in a very safe kind of way that doesn't feel overwhelming.
Mm.
And then after the yoga nidra, then we could if those things are relevant to talk about and you remember them, then it could be helpful to bridge it and bring it into therapy or process it or journal about it, talk about it, and integrate it more. But this is a very powerful practice that I recommend to do.
Mhm. So for people who are interested in what you're
Mhm.
describing, is this something they can just do at home? Do they
Yeah.
have to be in a studio?
Yeah, this is actually something to do alone at home. You want to have like you really want to have no disruptions. So you want to have a quiet, protected space, which I understand with babies, it can be a little bit hard to arrange that. But if you're able to carve out even like 10 to 15 minutes of yoga nidra for beginners can be very helpful. And then, over time, you can work your way up to longer yoga nidras, which are going to be, which are going to be just deeper and do more for you. So this is absolutely something that you can practice at home. The only thing that you need is a place to lay down and yourself, and just then to turn on the audio. That's it.
Where do you send people to find this?
Um, so so for yoga nidra, I actually have some recordings on a podcast. It's called Shalom Yoga, and so there's some recordings on there. There's other podcasts and YouTube channels that feature different yoga nidras by different people. So I will invite you to explore
Hmm.
yoga nidra and find a voice that really resonates for you, a voice that you feel really like touches your heart when you listen to it, words that touch your heart. So I invite you to experiment and find your yoga nidra person, and just listen to their stuff. And you can actually you can switch it up, but you can also listen to the same yoga nidra recording over and over. And that's actually that repetition. There's something very regulatory about it. There's something really safe about the predictability of it. It also helps to kind of train the brain through this dynamic repetition. And there's a lot of power in just repeating the same audio over and over again as well. But if you get bored of the same thing, it's okay to switch it up too.
Sure. But I mean, what I love about all of what you're saying is this really usable, practical. It's it's like at your fingertips, um,
Yeah,
right
exactly.
now. You could turn
Yeah,
us off and go do that.
yeah, and it's free.
And it's free, right?
Yeah,
Which I think is
yeah.
hard to find. It is one of the barriers to healing that I find is um, that people think it's going to take a lot of money. And certainly there are routes where you can spend loads and loads of money, but
Yeah.
there's so much now available for free,
Yes,
that
absolutely.
people who are highly skilled and really care, people who really care, are putting this out into the world for people to have access to healing. That in and of
Yeah.
itself is just so amazing and so powerful. Um,
Mhm.
so, I mean, I appreciate you sharing this in particular with us because sleep is such a big challenge,
Mhm.
and time is
Yes.
such a big challenge. So this like takes care of that fairly easily.
Yeah, exactly. There's really like no downsides to this, and it's so easy and accessible, and there's just so much to be gained from this practice.
Hmm.
Um, so I feel, I feel good about sharing it with as many moms as possible, because I've been there being sleep deprived with a colicky baby, and,
Hmm.
and just being so irritable the next day. Like I've been there, and I know how much this practice helps.
Well, and this is so useful and I think really impactful. I hope that people who are listening can really hear what you're saying and take this and use this right away if they need to and want to. And unfortunately for us, we won't be able to get back to the psychedelic assisted therapy stuff today, but sounds like there's another episode that I need to to make happen.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Mhm.
But for now, yeah, can you just I guess close us up with what you either for yourself or from the people you've supported, what your takeaways are for people who are listening?
Yeah, I just want to give hope to the listeners. Um, you are capable, you're competent, you already are skillful, and there's so many different paths to healing. Sometimes, us moms, we can have so many strengths and we can get a little lost in the drudgery of motherhood. But we can also find our way. We can also find our way back to ourselves, and there's so many paths to back to ourselves. Um, and they can be very simple and small. Um, like even, like centering your posture and doing a few forward folds at home if you're irritable or feeling stressed with your kid. That's healing happening in small, bite-sized little bricks, little moments.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to empower you and encourage you, and and hope that you and just hope that you find your path back to yourself, to healing, and really live the best life that you're made to live.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for coming on and sharing your story and your knowledge with us today.
Thank you so much, Kat. It's been such a pleasure. It's been so fun.
If you'd like to get connected with Ruthie, you can go to mentalfitnesstherapy.org. And also, she referenced a yoga podcast that she was working on, and it is now called Nala Yoga, and it can be found on Podbean, Amazon Music, Podchaser, and Google. The web link is nalayoga@podbean.com. If you know of anyone who could benefit from hearing her story or the work that she's doing, please forward this episode on to them. I can't begin to tell you how much feedback I get from listeners and from people who've gone through perinatal mental health experiences that need to hear these stories and need to know of the resources. It is really the number one way we can spread this information and education, as well as reduce stigma for people who are out there, because story is so powerful. If you haven't yet, you can connect with me on Instagram or my website, wellmindperinatal.com, where you can also find a listing of the courses I offer and podcast episodes. Thanks for being with us.